Welcome to Fear of Darkness. Today we tell the story of Silas Bennett, an enslaved boy in 1877 who saved the mistress of the plantation from a rampaging bull. The events that followed left every witness in shock. It's a story filled with tension and emotion, so take a breath, settle in, and listen closely. Before we go any further, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment letting us know which city and country you're tuning in from. Your support helps keep these stories alive instead of lost to time. Let's begin. The blood was still warm on his back when they dragged him to the auction block for the second time. Silas Bennett was 16, and he had just learned one of the cruelest lessons the American South had to offer, that saving a white woman's life could be far worse than letting her die. This is the story of a boy who could speak to animals better than he could to men, who committed the unforgivable sin of heroism in Georgia, 1877, and who went from being the gentlest soul on the Callahan plantation to something the night itself learned to dread. Georgia, 1877, the year the North gave up on the South. Federal troops had pulled out 3 months earlier, ending what historians called Reconstruction and white Southerners called occupation. In Washington, politicians shook hands over a compromise that left 4 million freed people at the mercy of their former masters. Rutherford Hayes took the presidency. The South took back control. For people like Silas Bennett, freedom was just a word on paper, yellowing in some distant courthouse. His father, Moses Bennett, had signed what landowners called a sharecropping contract in 1868. Moses couldn't read, so he marked it with an X, trusting the white man's word that it was fair. That contract bound the Bennett family to Henry Callahan's land until they paid off their share of seeds, tools, and the shack they called home. But the debt only grew. Every harvest, Moses stood in the plantation office while the overseer, a narrow-faced man named Garrett, ran his finger down a ledger and told them they owed more than they made. Seed prices went up. Cotton quality went down. There were fees for the mule, fees for the plow, fees for living on land once worked by unpaid labor. Silas had been born into slavery in 1861, too young to remember the war, but old enough to understand that the chains on his family now were made of paper instead of iron. They cut just as deep. The Callahan plantation sat on red clay hills in central Georgia. 3,000 acres of cotton, timber, and pasture. The main house was a white, columned structure that had survived Sherman's march by sheer luck, standing tall on a rise overlooking the workers' quarters. In 1877, 73 families lived on Callahan land, all black, all bound by contracts they couldn't read and debts they couldn't escape. But Silas didn't spend his days in the cotton fields. He had a gift Henry Callahan couldn't ignore. The boy could speak to animals. Not literally, of course. He didn't hear voices or get messages from spirits, no matter what the older folks whispered. When they saw him calm, a wild-eyed stallion with just his hands and voice, Silas had something rarer. Pure empathy. An ability to read an animal's fear in the tension of its muscles, its rage in the flare of its nostrils, its pain in how it held its weight. He moved among horses, cattle, and dogs like one of them, speaking their language of breath, posture, and stillness. When Silas was 11, Garrett brought a new stallion to the plantation, a magnificent black Tennessee Walker Callahan had bought in Atlanta for $200. The horse was beautiful and unmanageable. It had kicked 2 handlers and bitten a third. Garrett was ready to break it the old way, rope, whip, and crushing its spirit until only fear-driven obedience remained. Silas, mucking stalls, heard the commotion and climbed the fence. He watched the stallion rear and scream, eyes rolling white. The fear was so thick Silas could taste it. Before he knew what he was doing, he climbed into the paddock. The men shouted at him to get out. He ignored them. He walked toward the stallion with empty hands, eyes down, making himself small, safe, unthreatening. He approached at an angle, giving the horse room to move, room to choose. 10 feet away, he started humming, a low, tuneless sound from deep in his chest. The stallion's ears turned toward him. Silas stopped moving and kept humming. He didn't meet its eyes, knowing that meant challenge. He watched its feet, its breathing. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The men stood frozen. The stallion stepped toward Silas, then another step. 15 minutes later, Silas had his hand on the horse's neck, breathing in rhythm with the animal. Henry Callahan himself had been watching from the fence. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Boy's got the touch. Seen men work horses 40 years and never develop what that child just did natural." From that day on, Silas was the plantation's primary animal handler. Pulled from the fields, given charge of the horses, cattle, and hunting dogs. Better than Cotton. Though Silas never showed too much pride. Happiness was dangerous for a black boy in Georgia. It could be taken away just to remind you of your place. Silas lived for the hours in the stables and pastures. Animals made sense. A horse didn't care about skin color or birth. A dog didn't change its feelings based on who was watching. When a cow was scared, you saw why and fixed it, without navigating the deadly social codes between black and white. Animals were honest. They might be dangerous, but they were never cruel. They never hurt for the sake of hurting. You couldn't say the same about men. Especially white men in Georgia, 1877. Garrett watched Silas with permanent suspicion. Before the war, he'd overseen enslaved people in South Carolina. After, he drifted west and found work overseeing sharecroppers. The only difference was paperwork, and the fact he couldn't legally kill workers anymore. Though convict leasing gave workarounds for men who understood the new system. Garrett hated that Silas had a special place. Hated that Callahan sometimes spoke directly to the boy. Most of all, he hated that Silas could do something Garrett never could. Something that couldn't be learned through violence or white superiority. Boy's got ideas above his station. Garrett told other white men. Thinks he's special 'cause he can sweet-talk a horse. Needs to remember his place. But as long as Silas kept the animals healthy, Callahan protected him. The plantation owner was practical, focused on profit. He'd paid good money for breeding stock. The horses never went lame. The cattle stayed fat. The dogs were loyal. Silas knew his value was measured in dollars, in the health of animals worth more than he'd ever be. He did his work, kept his head down, stayed invisible. The other person who noticed Silas, for different reasons, was Eleanor Callahan. She was 26, married to Henry for 8 years, and profoundly lonely. Isolated by the very privileges meant to make her happy. Raised in Savannah society, educated by French nuns, trained in piano and social rituals, her marriage had been arranged over brandy and cigars. 2 men trading children like shares. Henry was 43, 17 years her senior, a widower needing an heir. She needed connections. It benefited everyone except her. They married in 1869. Eleanora moved to a plantation miles from town, surrounded by people once enslaved and white men who talked only of cotton and the lost cause. She had no friends, no children despite 8 years of trying, and a husband whose distant politeness masked indifference. She spent her days supervising servants, arranging flowers in empty rooms, playing piano in an echoing parlor. A beautiful object in a beautiful house, profoundly useless, dying in ways with no name. She first noticed Silas in 1874, watching from the veranda as he worked a difficult mare. The horse had been abused, would strike at anyone. But Silas spent hours, just sitting in the paddock, present, until she got used to him. Eleonora watched for a month, fascinated. She saw patience and gentleness, rare on a plantation where force ruled. She mentioned it to Henry once. "That boy with the horses is remarkable." He looked up from his roast beef. "The Bennett boy. Yes, useful with animals. Saves me money." That was it. Henry didn't encourage interest in workers. But Eleonora kept watching from her windows, envying his purpose, his clear meaning. At least he had something to care about. She was 26 and already a ghost. Spring 1877 brought unusual heat. By mid-April, thermometers hit the high 80s by noon. The red clay cracked like old leather. Tempers shortened. Henry Callahan had invested heavily in cattle over winter, seeing opportunity. Cotton was unpredictable, but beef brought money from growing cities. He bought a prize breeding bull from Texas in February. A massive longhorn, said to have sired 50 calves in 3 years. $300. Good investment. The bull arrived in March. It took 6 men with ropes and poles to unload it. The animal was monstrous, 6 feet at the shoulder, 2,000 pounds, horn spanning 5 feet. Its eyes held amber intelligence bordering on malevolence. Not domesticated. Barely contained wildness. Henry named it Leviathan. Perfect. Silas was assigned to integrate the bull into the breeding program. Pride and terror. Dangerous work. Bulls were unpredictable. Leviathan had the added volatility of being in a new place. The first time Silas approached, Leviathan charged the fence, cracking an oak post. The impact sounded like a gunshot. Silas jumped back, heart hammering. He stood at a safe distance and studied. This wasn't like horses. Horses were prey, governed by flight. Bulls had the confidence of animals with few predators. Leviathan didn't fear humans. It tolerated or challenged. Silas spent weeks observing. He noticed the bull was calmer in early morning, aggressive in afternoon heat. Leviathan had established hierarchy with other cattle, posturing to maintain dominance, but not attacking if they submitted. Always testing. Slowly, carefully, Silas began entering the bull's space. Never direct, never sudden. He'd enter the paddock along the fence, scatter feed, retreat, approach and retreat. Predictable, slow. By late April, after 2 months, Silas could work in the same paddock without incident. The bull learned he wasn't a threat, just food and water and open gates. Understanding, not trust. April 28, 1877, started like any other. Silas woke before dawn in the one-room cabin he shared with his parents and sister, Maya. Dirt floor, warped pine walls, gaps letting in cold and heat, his father already gone to the fields. His mother, Ruth, stirring cornmeal mush over the fire. The cabin smelled of smoke and fatigue. "You be careful with that devil bull," Ruth said as Silas pulled on cracked leather boots. "Same thing every morning." "Yes, Mama. That animal ain't natural. Got the devil's own temper." "I'm careful, Mama." Ruth turned from the fire, looked at her son, 16, taller than her, broad-shouldered, with her dark eyes. He'd grown into someone she hardly recognized. "I know you are, baby, but careful don't always matter when you're dealing with beasts and white folks. Both can turn for no reason." Silas kissed her papery cheek, aged beyond 30, ate by work and worry. He headed into pre-dawn darkness, walking the path from the quarters to the barns. His breath misted. Roasters crowd. He loved this time. Hours when he had the animals to himself, white men still sleeping, other workers just stirring. Peace. He fed the horses first. Oats, hay, checking water, running hands over legs and necks for heat or swelling. Then the cattle pens, counting heads. When he reached Leviathan's paddock, he stopped. Something was wrong. The bull stood motionless in the center, head lowered almost to the ground. Silas approached carefully. Leviathan's breathing was labored. Foam flecked its muzzle. One rear leg was held at an odd angle, not bearing weight. Injury. Snake bite. Poison. He needed to get closer. But a bull in pain was even more dangerous. Silas climbed the fence and dropped into the paddock. The bull's head came up. Amber eyes fixed on him. Leviathan took a lurching step forward, favoring the leg, and released a low bellow like distant thunder. "Easy now," Silas said, voice calm despite the fear crawling up his spine. "Easy, boy. Let me see what's wrong." He moved slowly to the side, talking in that low, crooning tone. Words didn't matter. Tone was everything. He could see the problem now. A long, jagged gash on the bull's left rear leg above the hock. Fresh. Probably caught on a broken fence board during the night. Bleeding slowly. It needed cleaning and treatment, but not life-threatening. The problem was getting close enough. "You got yourself hurt, didn't you, boy? We'll fix it. But you got to trust me." He stepped forward, hands empty. Leviathan exploded. The bull charged with impossible speed, 2,000 pounds of muscle and horn heading straight for Silas. He ran for his life, sprinting toward the fence. Boots slipped in loose dirt. He heard thunder behind him, felt heat on his back, heard rasping breath. He hit the fence and vaulted it in one desperate motion, tumbling over, landing hard, gasping. Leviathan hit the fence a half-second later, splintering oak rails. Horns punched through wood inches from where Silas had been. Silas lay in the dirt, heart hammering, breath ragged. Too close. "Boy, what the hell's going on?" Garrett's voice cut through the air. The overseer strode across the yard, pulling up suspenders, face twisted with anger. Silas got to his feet quickly. "Bull's injured, sir. Cut his leg. He's agitated." Garrett looked at the damaged fence, then back at Silas. "You antagonized that animal?" "No, sir. I was checking the injury." "Don't look like checking. Looks like you got him riled. Mr. Callahan paid $300 for that bull." "I wasn't mistreating him, sir. I was trying to help." "Don't sass me, boy." Garrett's hand moved to the coiled whip on his belt. "Go feed the other animals. I'll deal with the bull. Get real men to handle it proper." Silas wanted to explain. The bull was injured and frightened, needed time to calm, but he knew better than to argue. He ducked his head in submission and moved away toward the stables. The day grew hotter. By 10 a.m., the thermometer read 92 degrees, no wind. The plantation moved slowly, animals listless, men seeking shade. Henry Callahan had gone to town with his driver and account books, leaving Garrett in charge. That made everyone nervous. Garrett's mean streak usually kept in check by Callahan, but with the boss away, his true nature came out. Eleonora was in the main house, trapped in corset and petticoats. 3 layers of clothing, even in killing heat. She'd spent the morning reviewing accounts with Bessie, the head house servant, a ritual that filled empty hours. The tedium and heat gave her a vicious headache. She decided to walk through the gardens before lunch, hoping fresh air might help. Though the air was just hot, still heavy. The gardens were her one creative outlet, the single area Henry gave her full control. She'd spent years developing them, importing roses and azaleas, creating paths and beds that bloomed from spring to fall. A small sanctuary. She walked shaded paths, parasol offering meager relief, mind mercifully empty. Then she heard commotion from the cattle pens, men shouting, wood splintering. Beneath it all, a roar that vibrated the ground. Pure animal rage. Her headache vanished, replaced by adrenaline. She should have returned to the house. A lady had no business near agitated livestock, but curiosity and 8 years of stifling constraints pushed her forward. She walked toward the cattle pens, staying on the path along the eastern fence line, hidden by magnolia trees. She reached a gap and looked through. Chaos. Leviathan was free, having broken through the weakened fence. The bull was in full fury, injured leg apparently no hindrance. 4 men with ropes tried to corner it. As Eleonora watched, Leviathan charged one man, who dove behind a water trough. The bull's horns caught the trough, flipping it, sending 100 gallons spraying. Then her attention shifted. A 5th figure stood near the horse stable, separate from the men. Silas Bennett, shirtless in the heat, holding a wooden bucket. He stepped toward the rampaging bull, stopped, tense. Then he walked forward, bucket in front of him, posture non-threatening, movement slow. What was he doing? Eleonora's breath caught. Garrett saw him too. Boy, get back! This ain't your concern. Silas ignored him, focus locked on Leviathan. He kept walking with that strange confidence, radiating calm. The bucket swung in his hands, filled with feed catching sunlight. The bull wheeled to face this new challenge. Lowered its head, horns forward, foam dripped, eyes wild. Silas! No! A worker shouted. But Silas kept walking, as if the world had narrowed to just him and the bull. His lips moved, though she couldn't hear the words. 20 feet, 15, Leviathan pawed the ground, throwing red dust. 10 feet. Silas set the bucket down carefully and stepped back, hands open, empty. The bull stared with almost human intensity. Eleonora realized she was watching someone who might die, and she couldn't look away. The tension stretched. The yard went silent. Every man frozen. Even the animals quieted. Then Leviathan stepped forward. Not a charge, a step, then another, toward the bucket. Eyes still fixed on Silas. 8 feet. 6. The massive head lowered. The bull began to eat grinding grain like millstones. The men stood frozen, mouths open. Silas stepped back then again, creating distance. It was working. Eleonora released a breath. Then everything went wrong. One of the men with ropes, maybe thinking the moment was right, threw his loop toward Leviathan's horns. The rope slapped across the bull's face. Leviathan exploded from the bucket with a roar that shook bones. It charged, not toward the man, but toward the nearest target. Silas, retreating. The boy tried to run, but he was too close. Leviathan covered the gap in 2 strides, horns swinging up. Silas jumped aside at the last second. A horn caught his shirt, tore it clean off, but miraculously missed skin. He hit the ground, scrambled. The bull wheeled for another pass, and Eleonora Callahan screamed. A high, piercing sound of pure terror, cutting through chaos like a knife. She hadn't meant to. It tore from her throat without permission. Leviathan's head swiveled toward the sound. Saw movement in the magnolia trees. Something white fleeing. Eleonora turned to run, but her skirts tangled. Her parasol fell. Behind her, hooves thundered. The bull was coming. Leviathan crashed through the magnolias like grass. Eleonora heard it gaining, heard wet breathing. She was going to die. The thought came with strange calm. Her foot caught on a root. She fell, hitting the ground hard, all air driven from her lungs. She rolled onto her back, wanting to see death coming. 2,000 pounds of rage bore down. She could see veins in its eyes, foam dripping, horns about to punch through her body. Time slowed. She thought of her mother, the piano, all the things she'd never do. Then something slammed into her from the side, knocking her clear of the charge. A confused image of dark skin and terrified eyes. Silas Bennett throwing himself between her and the bull, grabbing her waist, rolling them toward an ancient oak. A horn caught his shoulder, slicing through skin and muscle, opening a gash that welled with bright arterial blood. But his momentum carried them clear. They slammed against the oak trunk as the bull thundered past. Eleonora lay on the ground, Silas's body half covering hers, his blood dripping onto her white dress in crimson flowers. He pushed up on his arms, looking down at her. "Mom, are you hurt? Can you hear me?" His voice seemed distant. She couldn't speak. Just stared at this 16, year-old boy who had risked his life to save hers, his blood on her dress, his hands on her in ways that would scandalize everyone. Behind them, Leviathan wheeled, preparing another charge. "Stay down," Silas said, voice suddenly calm despite terror in his eyes. He pushed to his feet, swaying, stepped between her and the charging bull. What happened next would be told for years, growing into legend. Silas Bennett, shirtless and bleeding, shoulder torn open, stepped away from the oak and walked directly toward the charging bull. He spread his arms wide, making himself large. From deep in his chest, he produced a sound no human throat should make. A roar, primal and terrifying. The sound of a creature refusing to be prey. It shook the air, vibrated the ground, and Leviathan stopped. 10 feet from Silas, the bull pulled up short, head swinging in confusion. This prey was advancing, making predator sounds. Silas held his ground, roaring continuously, broadcasting dominance and absolute refusal to yield. The bull stepped back, then another. The fight drained from its body. Silas advanced, still roaring. Leviathan backed away, rage fading from its eyes, replaced by uncertainty. This was the human who brought food, who moved slow and safe, part of the herd hierarchy. The bull stopped retreating and stood, sides heaving. Silas stopped roaring, lowered his arms slowly. "Easy now," he said, voice returning to calm. "Easy, Leviathan. It's done. You're all right." The men with ropes approached cautiously. Silas walked to the bull and placed his hand on its massive head between the horns. Leviathan leaned into the touch. "Good boy," Silas whispered. "I know you're scared. We'll help you." He turned to Eleonora, still on the ground, dress stained with dirt and blood, hair fallen, body shaking. Their eyes met across the distance. For a moment, they were just two people who had survived something terrible together. Not mistress and worker. Not white and black. Just two humans who had looked at death and lived. The moment shattered. "What in God's name is happening here?" Garrett's voice cracked like thunder. He came running, face purple with rage, hand moving to his pistol. He took in the scene through eyes trained by culture and prejudice. Eleonora on the ground, dress disarrayed, hair wild, skin marked with dirt. Silas standing over her, shirtless and bloodied, close enough to touch her. The bull calm beside him. Garrett's pistol came up, pointed at Silas's chest. "Step away from Mrs. Callahan, boy." Now, Silas's hands went up immediately. "Sir, I was trying to help her." The bull was charging. "Step away," Garrett shouted. Silas moved back quickly, hands raised, eyes fixed on the gun. Other men gathered, drawn by commotion. White men from the fields, faces hard with suspicion. They saw what Garrett saw. Garrett crossed to Eleonora, offered his hand, pulled her up with exaggerated gentleness. "Mrs. Callahan, are you injured? Did he hurt you? Did that boy put his hands on you?" Eleonora was shaking, shock and terror catching up. She opened her mouth to explain. Silas saved her life. He was a hero. He risked everything. The words were there. But before she could speak, she saw more men arriving, forming a larger circle. White men with weathered faces and hard eyes. Men who'd fought for the Confederacy and lost. Men who'd owned human beings and resented they couldn't anymore. They looked at Silas with expressions Eleonora recognized. They saw what Garrett saw: a black boy and a white woman in a compromising position. Her dress torn, blood stained. His hands that had touched her body. The truth didn't matter. The story they would tell mattered. The conclusion they'd already reached mattered. Eleonora felt the weight of that collective gaze. She understood what her silence would mean for Silas. But she also understood what the truth would mean for her. She'd have to admit she was near the cattle pens with no business there. That her scream provoked the bull's charge. That she was responsible. That a black boy had touched her, grabbed her waist, pressed his body against hers. Even for seconds, even to save her life. The mere description would ruin her. Plantation wives would whisper. Society would find her complicit. Her reputation, her only currency, would shatter. And Henry, what would Henry think? Would he believe it was innocent? Or would doubt poison their already distant marriage? She looked at Silas. His eyes pleaded silently. She looked at Garrett, at the other men pressing closer, at the gun still pointed at Silas. She looked at her trembling hand stained with his blood, and Eleanora Callahan made her choice. Not a conscious decision, but surrender to forces larger than herself. "I was walking in the gardens," she began, voice barely a whisper. "And the bull came through the trees. It frightened me. Not quite a lie. Not the truth. The truth bent to protect herself while throwing Silas to the wolves." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Did this boy touch you, ma'am? Put his hands on you?" "Say no," a voice screamed in her head. "Just say no." But if she said no, how explain the blood on her dress? Being on the ground, disheveled with Silas standing over her. Daniel would only make her look like she was hiding worse. "Startled me." 3 words. Not an accusation. Not a defense. Not the testimony that could save him. 3 words hanging in the air like a noose. Garrett repeated slowly, savoring them. "He startled you." He turned to Silas with pure malice. "You hear that, boy? You startled Mrs. Callahan. What were you doing getting close enough to startle her?" "No, sir. I was trying to help her. The bull was charging. I pushed her out of the way." Silas's voice was desperate. "You shut your mouth." Garrett snarled, gun rising. "I saw you standing over her, filthy hands on her. The bull was charging. I was saving her life." Garrett's pistol pointed at his face. "Shut your mouth. You think we're stupid? You were standing over a white woman with your hands on her. I don't care what story you tell." Eleonora wanted to speak. The words crowded her throat. "He saved my life. He's a hero. He did nothing wrong." But her throat closed. Her voice was gone, stolen by fear and consequences. She stood mute, spectator to a tragedy of her own making, watching her silence condemn a boy who had risked everything for her. The white men moved closer, forming a tight circle. Silas stood in the center, hands raised, blood still running down his chest from the wound he got saving her life. He looked at Eleanora one last time. His eyes held no anger or accusation, just terrible understanding that made her want to weep. He knew what her silence meant. He knew what was coming, and he knew there was nothing he could do. "Get a rope," Garrett said calmly. "We'll sort this proper when Mr. Callahan gets back. Until then, we make sure this boy don't run." They bound Silas's hands behind his back with rough hemp rope, knots so tight his fingers went numb. They marched him to the old whipping post near the equipment shed, sunk deep into the ground during slavery days. Still used occasionally for the worst offenses, though now without public spectacle. Eleanora watched them lead him away. His bare back straight, head held high. She wanted to run after them, explain, make it right. But her legs wouldn't move. Her voice wouldn't work. She stood frozen, a monument to cowardice. Bessie appeared at her elbow. "Mrs. Callahan, let's get you inside. You've had a terrible fright." Eleanora let herself be led to the house like a child. Up the stairs, to her bedroom. Bessie helped her out of the ruined dress, brought warm water and soft cloths. "Don't you worry, ma'am. It'll get sorted. Mr. Callahan will handle it." But Eleanora couldn't stop worrying. She moved to the window, still in undergarments, and looked out. Through wavy glass, she could see the whipping post. Silas tied there in the full sun, bare, chested, wound still bleeding. "Don't look at that, ma'am," Bessie said gently. Ain't nothing for you to see. But Eleonora couldn't look away. This was her doing. Her silence put him there. She stood at the window and watched Garrett pace in front of Silas like a predator circling prey. Waiting for Henry to return. Building his case. A story where Silas was the villain. Where Eleonora's silence condemned a boy who saved her life. Where truth mattered less than preserving the social order. The afternoon sun beat down, temperature past 95. Silas stood tied to the post with no shade, no water. Flies swarmed his wound. In the distance, thunder rumbled. A storm building over western hills. Too late to provide relief. Too late to wash away what had been done. Eleonora watched and felt something break inside her. Some foundation of herself, image cracking under the weight of what she'd done. She'd always thought of herself as kind, compassionate, better than the cruel society she was born into. But when the moment came to prove it, when it cost something to tell the truth, she failed. She traded a boy's life for her reputation, and both would have to live with that choice. Henry Callahan returned at 4 p.m., his carriage kicking up red dust. He'd spent the day negotiating loans, secured favorable terms, good spirits. Thinking about expanding cattle operation, he noticed the unusual number of men near the equipment shed. Garrett standing like a sentry. Callahan climbed down and walked toward them. "What's all this?" Garrett stepped forward, face arranged in concern and righteous anger. "Mr. Callahan, we've had an incident involving the bull and Mrs. Callahan." Callahan's expression changed. "Is Eleonora hurt?" "She's shaken up, but not seriously injured. But there's something you need to know." Garrett told his version, a carefully edited narrative emphasizing Silas standing over Eleonora with his hands on her, suggesting impropriety, painting the boy as an opportunist. He made no mention of the bull charging, Silas throwing himself between her and death. Callahan listened, face stone, jaw working. When Garrett finished, Callahan walked to Silas at the post. Hope flickered briefly in the boy's eyes. "Tell me exactly what happened." Callahan said quietly. "Tell me the truth, boy. I'll know if you're lying." Silas took a breath, throat dry from hours without water. "Sir, the bull broke free. It was injured and wild. It charged Mrs. Callahan. I pushed her out of the way. I was trying to save her life. That's all. I swear on my mother's life." Callahan studied him. "You put your hands on my wife to do this?" "Yes, sir. I had to. The bull was going to kill her. I pushed her toward the tree and took the hit on my shoulder instead." Callahan looked at the wound on Silas's shoulder. Clearly from a horn strike. He turned to Garrett. "You saw this happen?" "I saw him standing over her after, sir. With his hands on her. She was on the ground, dress torn. He was shirtless and bleeding all over her." "Did you see the bull charge her?" Garrett hesitated. "No, sir. I came running when I heard the commotion. But I saw what I saw after." Callahan turned back to Silas. "My wife, what did she say?" Silas's face twisted. "She said I startled her, sir." "Did you?" "Not on purpose. I was trying to save her life." Callahan stood for a long moment weighing. Silas was useful. Saved him money. Kept expensive animals healthy. But Eleonora was his wife. Social codes had to be maintained. Garrett cut him down. Garrett's face registered surprise. "Sir." "Cut him down. I'm not beating a boy for saving my wife's life, regardless of what it looked like." Garrett cut the ropes. Silas swayed, legs weak. "Thank you, sir. I'm not finished. I believe you probably saved Eleonora's life. But you put your hands on a white woman, boy. You touched my wife, regardless of reasons. That can't stand. Not here. Not in Georgia." 1877. Silas's face went gray. "Sir, please. I'm selling your contract to the Dade Coal Company. They've got a convict leasing operation up in the hills, always looking for strong young workers. You'll work off your father's debt in the mines instead of on the land. Consider yourself lucky, that's all. The convict leasing system. Silas had heard whispers. Men who went into the mines and never came out. Died in darkness, buried in unmarked graves. Slavery by another name. Legal, because workers were technically convicts serving sentences or working off debts. The mines killed slowly through lung disease, quickly through cave-ins. Companies worked convicts to death because they had no investment in keeping them alive. "Please, Mr. Callahan," Silas begged. "Please don't send me there. I'll work harder. I'll do anything. I won't never go near the house again. Please." "The matter's decided. You leave tomorrow morning. Garrett will make arrangements." Callahan turned and walked away. Garrett's face split in a cruel smile. "Looks like you're going down into the dark, boy. Hope you like the smell of coal dust and the feel of a pick in your hands. That's all you're gonna know from now on." The men untied Silas and shoved him toward the quarters. "Get your things together. Say your goodbyes." Silas walked back to the cabin on autopilot. Ruth was preparing the evening meal. The wooden spoon fell from her hand when she saw his face. "Silas. Baby, what happened?" "Your shoulder. They're sending me to the mines. Mama. Mr. Callahan's selling my contract to the coal company." Ruth's hand went to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. She knew what that meant. No, baby. What did you do?" "I saved Mrs. Callahan's life." The story poured out. The bull. The charge. Eleanor on the ground. His desperate attempt to protect her. "I did the right thing, Mama. And this is what I get." Ruth pulled him into her arms, careful of his shoulder, and held him while he finally broke. 16 years of holding everything in poured out in shaking sobs. "This world ain't right," she said quietly, rocking him. "But you listen to me, Silas Bennett. You did the right thing. You saved that woman's life. That makes you a hero, no matter what they do to you." Moses came home an hour later. Took the news in grim silence, face aging 10 years. Maya, 13, cried into her mother's skirts. They sat together as the sun set and the storm finally broke. Rain hammered the roof like nails. Silas would leave in the morning. Taken in chains to the Dade Coal Company, mine 40 miles north. Descend into the earth and might never see daylight again. Might never see his family again. All because he'd been brave enough to save a life. That night, Silas lay awake on his pallet, staring at the ceiling while rain poured. He thought about Leviathan, about amber eyes and understanding, about animals, dangerous but never cruel, never punishing for things you didn't do. He thought about Eleanor Callahan and the look in her eyes when she chose her reputation over his life. And he thought about the darkness waiting in the mines. About the years of slavery by another name stretching ahead. Something changed in Silas that night. Something fundamental shifted. The boy who believed in doing right, who believed in helping others, who believed in basic goodness, that boy died in the darkness of the cabin while the storm raged. What remained was harder. Something that understood the world's true nature. Something that would survive whatever came next and remember every detail of the injustice done to him. Morning came too quickly, gray and still raining. Garrett arrived with 2 other white men in iron shackles. They chained Silas's wrists and ankles, loaded him into a wagon like cargo. Ruth, Moses, and Maya stood in the rain watching, faces streaming with water and tears. Silas looked back as the wagon pulled away, memorizing their faces, storing every detail. Not knowing if he'd ever see them again, the wagon rolled through the plantation gates and onto the road north, toward the mountains, toward the mines, toward a darkness that would last 2 years and transform whatever remained into something new. The Dade Coal Company mine was a wound in the earth, shafts and tunnels driven deep into Georgia hills. Searching for coal seams discovered in the 1850s. The mine operated on convict leasing, paying the state and local authorities for labor of men convicted of crimes, or increasingly, black men arrested on trumped-up charges or sold by landowners to work off debts. Slavery continued under a different name. Legal, because the workers were technically criminals. Profitable, because the company had no obligation to keep them alive. The convicts worked 12 hours a day in darkness, breathing air thick with coal dust, bodies bent and broken by labor. They slept in wooden barracks, freezing in winter, stifling in summer, fed barely enough to keep them upright. When they died from cave-ins, lung disease, or exhaustion, they were buried in a field behind the barracks and replaced with new workers. Silas arrived in late April, descended into the earth for the first time in May 1877. The darkness was absolute, broken only by dim oil lamps. Air thick and hard to breathe, tasting of dust and damp and decay. Walls pressed in. The only sounds constant water drip, picks scraping coal, labored breathing of men working themselves to death. The boy who had spent his life under open sky, who worked with animals in sunlight and fresh air. That boy was buried in darkness. What emerged was new. Silas learned quickly that survival required different skills here. Physical strength mattered more than social navigation. Swinging a pick 12 hours straight. Carrying heavy loads through cramped tunnels. Ignoring pain and exhaustion and the slow suffocation of dust in your lungs. He also learned the men around him were different. Many were genuine criminals. Violent men who'd killed or raped or stolen. Others were like him, victims of new laws that made it illegal for black men to be unemployed, change jobs without permission, or speak disrespectfully to white people. All desperate, all angry, all understanding that the world above didn't care if they lived or died in darkness. Silas made himself strong, worked until his body transformed from 16-year-old boy into a man carved from stone and hardened by suffering. Shoulders broadened from swinging the pick. Hands calloused thick as leather. Lungs adapted to air that would have killed him in his first week. But more than his body, his mind transformed. The Silas who believed in doing right, who tried to help others, who saved Eleanora Callahan's life and was punished. That version was systematically dismantled. He watched men die and felt nothing, saw acts of cruelty and learned to commit them when necessary for survival, discovered that empathy was a liability among men. Caring about others gave them power to hurt you. He learned to be hard, cold, survive by any means necessary, forget concepts like justice or fairness or reward for doing right. In the second year, a cave-in on the western shaft killed 15 men instantly when support timbers gave way. Silas was in that shaft. He heard rumble and ran while the roof collapsed behind him. 10 feet from being crushed. He made it out just as the entrance sealed. The survivors stared at the collapsed tunnel. Everyone deeper was dead, buried instantly. The mine supervisor, a white man named Crenshaw, came down to assess. He looked at the collapsed shaft, did quick arithmetic. "Write those 15 off the books," he told his assistant. "We'll need 15 more from the county to replace them." 15 men dead, dismissed like broken tools. Silas stood there covered in coal dust and felt something snap. Something that had been bending under pressure for 2 years broke completely. That night, lying in his bunk, he made a decision. He would escape, get out of this place or die trying. Staying meant certain death anyway, just drawn out over years instead of minutes. But before he left, before he disappeared into the world above, he had unfinished business. The opportunity came 2 months later. Another partial collapse in the eastern shaft. Not as bad, but enough to create chaos. In the confusion, Silas simply walked away from his work gang. Moved deeper into the mine instead of toward the surface. Took side tunnels connecting to abandoned sections. He knew these tunnels from 2 years of work. Knew which connected to natural cave systems, opening onto the surface miles from the main entrance. He'd been planning this route for weeks, memorizing every turn. The mine bosses would assume he was buried. Write him off as dead, just another number to replace. By the time they realized he was missing, he'd be long gone. Silas emerged from a cave opening 3 miles from the mine on a summer night in 1879. He was 20 years old, looked 30, felt 100. He stood in darkness, breathing fresh air, for the first time in 2 years, and felt nothing. No relief, no joy, just cold clarity about what he needed to do next. He traveled only at night, moving south through Georgia hills toward Callahan's plantation. 5 days. Stealing food from farms. Avoiding roads and settlements. Becoming a ghost. He was unrecognizable as the boy who left. Body transformed by 2 years of brutal labor into something powerful and dangerous. Face hardened into planes and angles showing nothing. Eyes changed most of all. Flat and cold, showing no more emotion than stones. When he finally saw the Callahan plantation in the distance, white columns catching moonlight, he felt only one thing. Not anger. Something colder. Something that had grown in darkness, fed by every injustice, every death, every moment of suffering. A need for balance. For accounts settled. For the world to see what it had created. Silas didn't approach during the day. He waited in the forest, watching rhythms, seeing what changed and what stayed. He saw his father in the fields, older and more bent. His mother hanging laundry, moving like every motion hurt. Maya, 15 now, working in the garden. And Eleanora Callahan, still walking in her gardens, still trapped in her beautiful prison. He felt nothing looking at her. The hatred he'd expected wasn't there. Just cold calculation. She'd made her choice 2 years ago. Now he would make his. He also saw Leviathan. Still the pride of Callahan's herd. Still massive and dangerous. Older now, moving slower, but still dominant. Silas watched and remembered the understanding they'd once shared. The connection between his mind and the bulls. He wondered if it still existed. He was about to find out. Silas entered the plantation on a night when heavy clouds covered the moon. He moved like shadow among buildings, heading not for the main house, but for the stables and cattle pens. Animals sensed him coming. Horses stirred in stalls, nickering softly. Cattle moved restlessly but didn't panic. Some part of him that survived the mine still carried that quality that made animals trust him. He went to Leviathan's pen first. The bull was awake, standing in the center of the paddock as if waiting. Silas climbed the fence and dropped in. The bull's head came up, nostrils flaring. For a long moment, boy and bull regarded each other in darkness. Then Silas walked forward and began to speak, voice roughened by coal dust and screaming in the mines. "Remember me, old friend. Remember the boy who brought you food." Spoke soft. That boy died in the dark, but part of him still here. Leviathan stepped toward him. Then another. Amber eyes caught faint light. Silas reached out and placed his hand on the massive head between the horns, where he'd touched the animal for the last time 2 years ago. "I need you to remember something else. Remember that day, running, fear and rage. Remember how that felt. Because tonight, old friend, tonight you're going to run again." Then Silas did something he'd never done. Instead of calming the bull, instead of soothing fears and easing tensions, he did the opposite. He reminded Leviathan of every moment of stress and pain, the injury that started everything. Fear when men with ropes surrounded it. He spoke to the animal's rage instead of its calm, fed its aggression. The bull's breathing changed, faster, harsher. Muscles tensed beneath Silas's hand. Memory came, and with it, the emotion that had driven it mad 2 years before. Silas moved from pen to pen, opening gates, removing bars, whispering to each animal. He didn't free them immediately. He arranged them, positioned them, created a herd he could direct. Horses nervous but followed commands, cattle milling but stayed grouped. At the center, Leviathan built toward explosion like a storm-gathering force. When everything was ready, Silas climbed an old oak near the main house. From his perch, he had a clear view of the front, of windows glowing with lamplight. Movement inside. Henry Callahan preparing for bed. Eleanor in her room on the second floor, probably sitting at her window, looking out at grounds as she so often did. Silas pulled a piece of metal from his pocket, a fragment of chain carried from the mines. He threw it with all his strength at Leviathan's flank. The metal struck with a sharp crack echoing across the yard. Leviathan exploded. The bull Silas had carefully wound up, filled with remembered rage, erupted into violent motion. It charged the fence, smashing through weakened boards Silas had partially sawn. Other cattle, nervous from manipulation, panicked and followed. Horses broke from loosened stalls. In seconds, a stampede thundered across the yard toward the main house. Ground shook with hooves. Noise tremendous, rolling thunder growing louder. Lights came on in windows. Silas heard shouting, watched as Henry Callahan appeared on the front porch in his nightshirt, trying to understand. Then Leviathan hit the front steps. The bull took them in one massive leap, horns lowering as it crashed through the front door like paper. Other animals followed, driven by panic and momentum, flowing into the house like a flood of flesh and fury. Screaming started immediately, Eleanor's voice high and terrified. Henry shouting orders no one could hear. Furniture smashed, glass breaking, hooves on hardwood never meant to bear such weight. Silas watched from his tree, face showing nothing. Not hot rage, cold accounting. The world seeing what it created when it took a boy who helped and healed, and turned him into something that destroyed. Cattle rampaged through the first floor, driven by terror, confined space, and Leviathan's rage. The bull was everywhere, using horns to smash everything in its path. Furniture, walls, anything moving. Silas heard Eleanor scream again, calling for help, Henry trying to reach her. Curses as cattle blocked his path. Silas sat in his tree and felt nothing. She'd had a chance to help him. She chose silence. Now he chose the same. The destruction lasted, maybe 10 minutes before animals found their way back out through shattered doors and windows. They scattered across plantation grounds, wild and impossible to control. Leviathan was last to emerge, white hide stained with blood from a dozen cuts sustained smashing through the house. The bull stood on the ruins of the front porch and bellowed triumph, a sound that carried across the entire plantation. Silas climbed down as first gray light touched the eastern sky. He walked past shattered remains of the main house entrance, past overturned furniture and broken glass. He heard weeping from the second floor, but didn't look up. He walked to the road leading away, moving with steady pace of someone with nowhere in particular to go and all the time in the world to get there. Behind him, the Callahan plantation descended into chaos. Workers emerged from cabins to find the main house destroyed and animals scattered. They would find blood but no bodies. Eleanor and Henry survived physically, but their world, their carefully ordered existence, lay in ruins. Silas Bennett walked away as the sun rose behind him, casting his shadow long and dark across Georgia clay. He had become what the world made him, a boy who loved animals transformed into something the night itself feared. A gentle soul crushed, and reformed into an instrument of revenge. He disappeared into the world, becoming a ghost, a legend, a story told in whispers in the quarters of other plantations. Some said he died in the mountains. Others claimed they'd seen him years later, living wild in forests, surrounded by animals that obeyed his every command. Still others said he went north, disappeared into anonymity of cities, where a black man could vanish and never be found. The truth was simpler and sadder. Silas Bennett lived for 30 more years, working various jobs under various names, never staying long enough to form connections or draw attention. The capacity for connection burned out of him in the mines, leaving only the shell of a man who moved through the world without touching or being touched. He died in 1909 in a boarding house in Atlanta, alone in a rented room. His body found only when the landlady noticed the smell. No funeral, no mourning, no one to remember the boy who could speak to animals with just his voice and hands. The only thing found among his belongings was a piece of rope, carefully preserved. The same rope that bound him to the whipping post on the day his life ended and his long dying began. Eleanor Callahan lived until 1923. 46 more years after that terrible night when the animals destroyed her home. She and Henry rebuilt the house and their lives, but something fundamental broke that could never be repaired. She never had children. She never left the plantation again. And on certain nights when the wind was right, she would wake from dreams of amber eyes and thundering hooves. Dreams where a boy with blood on his shoulder looked at her with eyes holding only the terrible weight of understanding. She carried the weight of what her silence did for the rest of her life, a burden that grew heavier with each passing year until it crushed her spirit as surely as the mines crushed Silas Bennett. This is the story of a boy who saved a life and lost his own. A story of heroism punished and cruelty rewarded. A story of how systems of oppression that defined the American South after Reconstruction created monsters from saints and called it justice. Silas Bennett's name is in no history book. There's no monument marking where he lived or died, but his story echoes across years as a reminder of the terrible cost of a society built on inequality and violence, where saving a life could be the most dangerous thing you could do, and where silence in the face of injustice could destroy both victim and perpetrator in different, but equally complete ways. The plantation where it all happened is gone now, reclaimed by Georgia earth. The mine where Silas suffered is sealed and abandoned, but the story remains, passed down through generations. A ghost story that's all the more terrifying for being true.